Our second reading this morning comes from the Gospel according to John, chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. I invite you again to listen to the word of our Lord as it may speak to us at this time and in this place. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that of you and me? My hour is not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were six stone jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water, that had become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called to the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I was in the middle of college when September 11th, 2001 happened, and it changed the trajectory of what I was studying in college. I originally was planning on becoming a screenwriter, and then I got interested in, essentially, I became curious about how religion can be used as a social force. And more importantly than that, how it could be used as a social force for good. Because all we were hearing at the time, at least in the town and at the campus, was how religion had caused badness and evil as a social force. And so I started studying the civil rights movement, and specifically Dr. King, and I ended up writing a thesis on how religion can be used as a social force for good. And I might have shared the story with you, but in King's autobiography, he wrote something that really became transformational for me, that I've been trying to hold on to throughout my studies. He writes about an experience he had in January of 1956, one night in Alabama. He said the phone rang and he answered it, and a voice answered saying, "Listen, we've taken all we want from you. You're going to be sorry that you've ever come to Montgomery, Alabama next week." Dr. King wrote that he hung up and he said he couldn't sleep. He writes, "It seems that all of my fears had come down on me at once. I'd reached the saturation point." And he talks about then how he got out of bed in the middle of the night and he started pacing the floor, and he went to the kitchen and he made himself coffee, which I can totally relate to in the middle of the night. And he said he'd been threatened like that many times before, but for some reason, this one had really gotten to him. He said he sat down at the kitchen table with his pot of coffee, thinking of all he had to lose. King writes, "I was ready to give up with my cup of coffee sitting untouched before me. I tried to think a way to move out of the picture without appearing a coward. I sat there and thought about a beautiful little daughter who had just been born. I started thinking about a dedicated and loyal wife who was over there asleep, and she could be taken from me, or I could be taken from her. And I got to the point that I couldn't take it any longer. I was weak." He goes on saying that he prayed a prayer to God expressing his fears and his weakness, and for God to give him a way to bow out of the situation and the leadership roles he was in. And he said he just sat there quietly. And he continues on in his autobiography. He says, "I'll tell you, I've seen the lightning flash. I've heard the thunder roar. I've felt sin breakers dashing, trying to conquer my soul. But I heard the voice of Jesus saying, 'Still to fight on.' He promised to never leave me alone." He writes, "At that moment, I experienced the presence of the divine as I have never experienced him before. All at once, my fears began to go. My uncertainty disappeared. I was ready to face anything," he said. 3 days later, his house was bombed. But Dr. King said it was that night, sitting at his kitchen table, was the first time that he ever believed in a personal God, that God was something personal. He said, "True, I had always believed in the personality of God, but in past years, the idea of a personal God was a little more than a metaphysical category, which I found theologically and philosophically satisfying." He writes, after that, though, now it is a living reality that has been validated in the experiences of everyday life. That now God is a living reality that has been validated in the experiences of everyday life. I try to carry that around with me. I try to remember what Dr. King says here about God being a metaphysical category that can be theologically and philosophically satisfying, rather than God being personal and interactive and, well, real. Because it's easy when you're in a vocation and in a calling like mine, and I expect that it's just easy in life in general to sit around and think about and try and figure out and study about God rather than developing a relationship with God and learning about who God is and seeing God working in my life. If I guess in a moment of self-examination, I feel like sometimes I spend too much time reading books and watching documentaries to know about God, rather than living my life and actually getting to know God. And to be honest with you, I'm standing up here this morning and I'm not entirely sure what the author of John is trying to say with the story at the wedding. I'm really not sure I understand the point. But what I think it's about, what this passage in John is trying to do, is to remind us, maybe, that God is personal, that Jesus is personal. I mean, John starts off this gospel with this huge and magnificently beautiful and poetic statement about who Jesus is, that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, etc., right? That God is this big, infinite, and ultimate thing, and then that Jesus somehow is an intimate part of that Jesus is bigger than life, that Jesus somehow is in the essence of the cosmos itself, even at its inception, that he's an integral part of this big and majestic God that created anything. But then John moves and shows us a completely different side of Jesus. He shows us this Jesus that goes to weddings and is involved in the everyday aspects of living life. And think about how powerful that is. Imagine if the creator of the universe showed up at your wedding. I mean, I get starstruck by musicians and writers, let alone by meeting the creator of the universe. But that's exactly who Jesus is. The Gospel of John tells us he was there at the very beginning of the beginning, and yet he's a guy that shows up to weddings that he's invited to. He lives life with ordinary people. People like you and me. On a side note, I find it very comforting that even Jesus' mom tells him to do things as an adult, and even though he doesn't seem to want to, he ends up doing them anyways. But I think that Jesus still goes to weddings. I think that he still lives and walks among ordinary people in ordinary life. I think that God still walks with us and moves along with us and is personally invested in each of us. And sometimes we lose sight of that. Sometimes we forget that this big and ultimate and infinite God also gets involved in the ordinary life of everyday human beings. I think that sometimes we spend so much time thinking about God that we forget to spend time with God. I know that I sometimes move God into abstraction and forget that God is here and now living, moving, and working and breathing among us. But there are moments then when I remember to look around, and I really can see God moving and acting and living in this world in every moment of every day. The problem is that it's easy to forget that God is acting and moving in this world, or that Jesus is still with us. It's easy to miss God in this world for some reason. I mean, after all, in the story, most of the guests don't really understand what has happened here to the wine. They don't know that Jesus has just performed a miracle. In fact, most of them probably never know that. Most of them don't even know who Jesus is at this point. I mean, there he is, the human manifestation of the creator of the universe, the Word incarnate. And no one really recognizes him for what he is, or who he is, or see what he's doing. I mean, it sounds like the disciples see what's going on. Those who are looking for God see God in him. But the rest of the guests just don't have any idea. Sometimes it's just too easy to miss God in our presence. Sometimes, like at the wedding, we see these miracles of God happening all around us, but we don't realize or recognize that's really what's going on. Sometimes we're so busy just living our lives and doing what it is that we think we should be doing that we forget to look up and see who's at this wedding party with us. Sometimes we get so jaded that we forget that miracles even happen all around us. I feel pretty lucky. I've got these 4 kids who are just amazingly creative. And I'll admit that their creativity can be sometimes frustrating, like the time Isaac painted a chocolate syrup mural on the kitchen wall. But if you can cut through sometimes the frustrating part of their creativity, I think what it is they do is they teach me so much about what it is to look at this world with fresh eyes. They help to remind me that sometimes it isn't necessarily about thinking, that thinking isn't what's called for. That I need to be more open to and look at things with new eyes and a new openness to what really may be there. That I shouldn't discount the possibility that things aren't always what they seem. And I find that when I do that then, when I really try and listen to my kids and take their advice and I stop thinking about and I stop trying to analyze or overanalyze things, I realize then that I really can see God and God's miracles in this world. Sometimes it just starts by seeing God in their faces and realizing that what miracles they actually are. And what a miracle life is. And with Isaac, it's a miracle that he's still alive and that his mother hasn't killed him sometimes. And when I do that then, I can then start to see miracles that happen all around me. That once my eyes are open to the possibility, I can then begin to see miracles all throughout life that we sometimes forget are even miracles. You see, because I believe that God is not only just a personal God, a God that knows us and walks among us, but a God that wants to be in relationship with us, but our God is a God who still performs miracles every day. Sometimes they're very small miracles, and they're very simple miracles. After all, I don't think turning water into wine to keep a wedding party going is all that big of a miracle. Not when you compare it to healing lepers or raising people from the dead. But John tells us it's a miracle all the same. And it happens at a wedding. Something that happens every day. Some people didn't even see it as a miracle. Like I said, one of the guests thanks the host for saving the best wine for last. He had no idea of what has happened or that this miracle had taken place or even that God made human was literally in the same room as him. But there Jesus is. And it's a miracle all the same. And so I think that just like God is a personal God, God is a God who still does miracles. And that if we live our lives with our eyes open to it, we see that these miracles happen every day. It's all a matter of being a question of whether or not we choose to see it that way. I mean, life is a miracle. Love is a miracle. Children are miracles. Elderly people are miracles. The fact that we can develop relationships with each other is a miracle. The human body is a miracle. When you really start to think about it, the existence of all creation is a miracle. And these miracles then don't stop happening. They happen all the time. Sometimes we just don't see them as such. Sometimes we just don't recognize them. Modern medicine is a miracle. And if we just then take time to look at things anew, if we take time sometimes to stop analyzing and to quiet our minds, and to really look and really see what's in front of us, I'm truly convinced that we then begin to see the reality of a personal God who's intimately involved in our lives. And that we'll then see the miracles that this God creates around us at every moment of our lives. So may you go seeing the miracles of God all around you. May you go with eyes wide open to the reality of a God in Jesus who is constantly with you. And may you go understanding that even when it doesn't seem like it, your God and your Christ are intimately and personally involved in your life. Amen.